The sound of hooves pounding through knee-deep snow was barely audible over the howling wind that tore across the Arizona plains. And Priscilla Sanders knew with absolute certainty that if she did not find shelter within the next hour, she would freeze to death in this God-forsaken blizzard. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin leather gloves 2 miles back, and her mare was struggling with every step through the unexpected January storm that had descended upon the high desert like the wrath of an angry god. She had left Tucson 3 days ago with a wagon train heading north toward Flagstaff, but when her uncle had fallen ill with fever, the wagon master had left them behind at a small trading post with promises to send help back. Her uncle had died that very night, and Priscilla had made the foolish decision to try to catch up with the train rather than wait out the winter at the post with strangers who looked at her with eyes that made her skin crawl. Now she was alone in a blizzard that should not even exist in Arizona, though she had heard tell that the higher elevations could get snow this time of year. It was January of 1873, and she was 22 years old and likely about to die in the frozen wasteland between Tucson and Flagstaff. The irony was not lost on her that she had survived a Comanche raid in Texas, a bout of cholera in New Mexico, and her father's drunken rages throughout her childhood, only to perish because she had been too proud to stay among men who made crude suggestions when they thought she could not hear. Through the white curtain of snow, she caught sight of something dark against the landscape. A structure of some kind, though whether it was a house or merely a rock formation, she could not tell. Her mare seemed to sense potential shelter and picked up her pace without prompting, pushing through the drifts with renewed determination. As they drew closer, Priscilla could make out the definite lines of a cabin, smoke rising from a stone chimney. Relief flooded through her so intensely that tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. She slid from her horse in an ungraceful heap, her legs refusing to hold her weight after so many hours in the saddle. The snow cushioned her fall, but the cold seeped through her wool skirts immediately. She crawled toward the door, her mare following behind, and raised one numb fist to pound against the wood. The sound was weak, pathetic, and she tried again with more force, though her arm felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The door swung open so suddenly that she nearly fell forward into the cabin. A man stood silhouetted against the warm glow of firelight, tall and broad-shouldered, with a revolver in his hand that he quickly holstered when he saw her crumpled in the snow. "Jesus Christ," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. He crouched down and gathered her up in his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. "How long have you been out in this?" Priscilla tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form words. She was vaguely aware of being carried inside, of blessed warmth surrounding her, of the door closing behind them and the howling wind becoming muted. The man set her down in a chair near the fireplace and immediately began working at the buttons of her coat with efficient fingers. "We need to get these wet things off you," he said. "Can you hear me? Can you understand what I am saying?" She managed a nod, though her head felt disconnected from her body. She studied him through eyes that did not want to focus properly. He had dark hair that fell past his collar, a strong jaw shadowed with several days of beard growth, and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green. He wore simple clothes, a work shirt and trousers held up by suspenders, and his hands were calloused and scarred from hard labor. "Your horse," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Please, my horse. I will see to your horse as soon as I know you are not going to die in my chair," he said firmly. He had her coat off and was working on her boots, which were so frozen that he had to use a knife to cut the laces. "What in God's name were you doing out in this storm?" "Did not know there would be a storm," she said. Left Tucson 3 days ago. Uncle died. Had to keep moving. He glanced up at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. Sympathy, perhaps, or understanding. "My condolences for your loss," he said. "But you damned near joined him. Another hour and you would have." He got her boots off and peeled away her stockings, which were soaked through. Her feet were an alarming shade of white with blue undertones, and he cursed under his breath. "This is going to hurt," he warned her, and then he began massaging her feet with firm, purposeful movements that sent pins and needles shooting up her legs. She gasped at the pain, but he did not stop. "I know," he said, "but we need to get the blood flowing again. What is your name?" "Priscilla Sanders," she managed. "From San Antonio originally." "Russell Quinn," he said. "Most folks call me Russ. I run cattle on the land around here, though not much running gets done in weather like this." He kept working on her feet until the color began to return, and then he wrapped them in thick wool blankets and moved to her hands. The same process repeated, the same shooting pains, the same gentle efficiency. When he was satisfied that she was not in immediate danger of losing any extremities to frostbite, he finally stood and retrieved a heavy blanket from a trunk in the corner. "I am going to see to your horse now," he said. "There is coffee on the stove and some stew in the pot. Help yourself to both. Do not leave that chair until I get back, you hear me? Your body needs time to warm up slowly." Before she could respond, he was pulling on a heavy coat and heading back out into the storm. The door closed behind him, and Priscilla was left alone in the warm cabin, shaking not just from cold but from the realization of how close she had come to death. She looked around the space with growing curiosity. It was a single large room with a sleeping area sectioned off by a curtain in one corner, a kitchen area with a stove and shelves of supplies, and the living area where she sat near the stone fireplace. Everything was neat and well maintained, the floor swept clean, the dishes washed and stacked. It was the home of a man who took pride in his surroundings despite living alone. She thought about getting up to pour herself some of that promised coffee, but her legs still felt unreliable, and she remembered his instruction to stay put. So she waited, listening to the wind howl outside and watching the flames dance in the fireplace. It was a good fire, built with experienced hands, the kind that would burn steady and hot for hours. Russell Quinn returned perhaps 15 minutes later, covered in snow and stomping his boots on the mat by the door. "Your mare is settled in the barn with my horses," he reported. "I rubbed her down and gave her feed and water. She will be fine." "Thank you," Priscilla said, and found that her voice was stronger now, less shaky. "I cannot tell you how grateful I am. When I saw your cabin, I thought I might be hallucinating." "You are lucky you found it," he said, hanging up his coat and moving to the stove to pour 2 cups of coffee. "This is not exactly on any main road. I am about 12 miles north of Tucson, but most travelers take the route that runs east of here." He brought her a cup and then ladled stew into a bowl, handing that to her as well. "Eat slowly. Your stomach needs to adjust." She took the bowl gratefully and inhaled the scent of beef and vegetables. It smelled like heaven. "How long have you lived out here?" "Built this place about 5 years ago," he said, settling into the chair across from her with his own bowl. "Came out from Missouri after the war. Wanted land and peace and quiet, and I got all 3. "You were a soldier," his expression closed off slightly. "I was, Union cavalry, but that was a long time ago and I prefer not to dwell on it." She nodded, understanding. Many men who had fought in that terrible war carried scars that went deeper than flesh. "I am sorry. I did not mean to pry." "You are not prying," he said, his tone softening. "I just find that looking forward serves me better than looking back." So, Priscilla Sanders from San Antonio, What were you doing traveling with just your uncle for protection? Do you have other family waiting for you in Flagstaff? She shook her head. No family. My mother died when I was 12, and my father drank himself to death 2 years ago. My uncle was my mother's brother, the only kin I had left. We were heading north because he had heard there was work for carpenters in the mining towns. I was going to find work as well, maybe as a seamstress or a cook. And now I suppose I will still head north when the weather clears, she said, though the words felt hollow. The truth was she had no idea what she would do. She had $37 to her name, a horse, a saddle, and the clothes on her back. Not exactly a fortune to start a new life with. Russell studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. This storm is not going to clear for days, he said. Maybe a week or more. We are in for a hard winter this year, I can feel it in my bones. You are welcome to stay here until the roads are passable again. I could not impose on you like that, she protested, though the thought of going back out into the cold made her want to weep. It is not an imposition, he said firmly. I have supplies enough for two, and the company will be welcome. It gets lonely out here during the winter months. Besides, I will not send a woman back out into a blizzard. What kind of man do you think I am? She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw only sincerity in his eyes. A good one, I think, she said quietly. I accept your offer, Mr. Quinn, and I thank you for your generosity. Russell, he corrected. Or Russ. We are going to be living under the same roof for a while, might as well dispense with the formalities. Then you must call me Priscilla. That is quite a mouthful, he said with the hint of a smile. Do you have a shorter version? My mother used to call me Scylla, she admitted, but I have not gone by that since she passed. Scylla, he repeated as though testing the name. I like it. Suits you better than Priscilla if you do not mind my saying so. She found herself smiling despite everything. I do not mind. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Russell showed her the sleeping area behind the curtain. You will take the bed, he said, brooking no argument. I will make up a bedroll by the fire. It is warmer there anyway. I cannot take your bed, she protested. Yes, you can and you will, he said. I insist. You have been through an ordeal today and you need proper rest. There are clean nightclothes in the trunk at the foot of the bed. They will be too big for you, but they are warm and dry. She wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a heavy weight. Thank you, Russell, she said, for everything. I truly do not know what I would have done if I had not found your cabin. You would have died, he said bluntly, but you did find it and you are safe now. That is what matters. He left her to change, and she found a thick flannel nightshirt in the trunk that hung nearly to her ankles. It smelled like soap and pine, clean and masculine. She crawled under the heavy quilts on the bed and felt herself sinking into the most comfortable mattress she had lain on in months. Through the curtain, she could hear Russell moving around the cabin, banking the fire and arranging his bedroll. The wind still howled outside, but inside it was warm and safe. And for the first time in days, Priscilla Sanders felt like she might actually survive. She woke to gray light filtering through the cabin's small window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back. The storm, the desperate ride, Russell Quinn opening his door and pulling her to safety. She sat up slowly, testing her body for damage. Her feet and hands ached, but not unbearably so, and she felt warm all the way through for the first time since leaving Tucson. She dressed in her own clothes, which had been hung near the fire to dry and were now warm and only slightly damp. When she emerged from behind the curtain, she found Russell at the stove, tending to a skillet full of bacon and eggs. "Morning," he said without turning around. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," she said honestly. "Thank you for asking. Good. Breakfast is almost ready. There is fresh water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. She did, grateful for the opportunity to make herself presentable. Her hair was a disaster, tangled from being under a wet hat all day yesterday, but she managed to comb it out with her fingers and braid it into a long plait down her back. When she joined Russell at the small table, he had 2 plates loaded with food waiting. "You did not have to go to all this trouble," she said. "No trouble," he replied. "I have to eat anyway, and cooking for 2 is not much different than cooking for 1. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and then Priscilla ventured, "Has the storm let up at all?" Russell shook his head. "Still coming down hard. I went out to check on the animals at first light, and the drifts are already up past my knees in places. We are not going anywhere for a while. I feel terrible about putting you out like this." "You are not putting me out," he said, a touch of exasperation in his voice. "I meant what I said last night. The company is welcome. I have spent the last 2 winters out here alone, and it gets old talking to cattle and horses." She smiled at that. "What do you talk to them about?" "The weather, mostly," he said deadpan. "Sometimes philosophy. The cattle are not much for deep conversation, but they are good listeners." She laughed, surprised by the sound coming from her own throat. When was the last time she had laughed? She could not remember. Russell smiled at her reaction, and she noticed how it transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger than she had initially thought. He was probably around 30, she guessed, though life on the frontier had a way of aging people before their time. "Can I help with anything?" she asked. "I feel useless just sitting here." "You are recovering from near death," he pointed out. "I think you have earned a day of rest. But if you are determined to be useful, you could mend that shirt." He pointed to a work shirt draped over the back of a chair, a long tear visible in the sleeve. "I am terrible with a needle, and I have been putting it off for weeks." "I can do that," she said, grateful for something to occupy her hands. "Do you have a sewing kit?" He produced one from a shelf, and she set to work while he cleaned up from breakfast. They fell into an easy rhythm, him going about his daily chores and her working on the mending. She found 2 more shirts that needed attention, and a pair of trousers with a split seam. By midday, she had repaired all of them and was starting on a sock that was more whole than fabric. "You might want to just throw that one away," Russell observed, looking over her shoulder. "I think it has passed the point of no return." "Nonsense," she said. "A little creative darning and it will be good as new." He shook his head but looked amused. "If you say so." The day passed quietly, almost peacefully. Russell read from a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets while she worked on her mending, occasionally reading a passage aloud when he found one particularly striking. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, admiring the way the firelight played across his features and the gentle way he turned the pages, as though the book was something precious. "You like poetry?" she asked when he paused in his reading. "I do," he said, sounding almost defensive. "I know it is not what people expect from a cowboy, but I find it helps pass the long winter nights." "I think it is wonderful," she said sincerely. "My mother used to read poetry to me when I was little. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed it." He looked pleased by her response. "Would you like me to read to you?" "I would like that very much." So he read, his deep voice giving life to words written centuries ago, and she listened while her needle flashed in and out of fabric. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside Russell Quinn's cabin, there was warmth and peace and something else that Priscilla could not quite name, but that made her chest feel tight in a not unpleasant way. The days began to blur together in a pattern that felt almost domestic. Russell would wake before dawn to tend to the animals. Priscilla would have coffee ready when he returned, and they would share breakfast before dividing up the day's chores. She took over the cooking, which Russell seemed grateful for, and he made sure the cabin stayed warm and the water buckets stayed full. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and he would read or they would talk, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. She learned that he had come west with dreams of building a cattle empire, though his ambitions had scaled back to something more manageable over the years. He now ran a modest herd of about 200 head, enough to make a decent living but not so many that he needed hired help year-round. In the spring and fall, he would hire on a few hands for branding and drives, but otherwise he managed the ranch alone. "You never get lonely?" she asked one evening about a week into her stay. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I did at first," he admitted. "But I got used to it, or I thought I did. Having you here has made me realize how much I have been missing human conversation." "I know what you mean," she said softly. "I have been alone since my father died, really. My uncle was kind but distant. We traveled together out of necessity more than affection. That sounds like a hard way to live. It was the only way I knew." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks under his scrutiny. "You deserve better than that," he said. "You deserve a home and people who care about you and a life that is more than just survival." "That is a lovely thought," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "But wanting something and getting it are two different things." "Maybe," he conceded. "But sometimes opportunities present themselves when we least expect them." She was not sure what he meant by that, and she was almost afraid to ask. The truth was that she had been thinking dangerous thoughts lately. Thoughts about what it might be like to stay here permanently, to make a life with this kind, quiet man who read poetry and treated her like she was something valuable. But she was a practical woman, and she knew that gratitude could easily be mistaken for something deeper. She owed Russell her life, but that did not mean she was in love with him, except that she was starting to think maybe she was. It happened slowly, like snow accumulating on a roof, each moment adding another layer until the weight of it was undeniable. The way he smiled when she said something that amused him, the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine. The careful way he had taught her to play chess, using pieces he had carved himself from pine wood during previous winters. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, like she was a puzzle he was trying to figure out. 2 weeks after her arrival, the storm finally broke. Priscilla woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the window and a silence that was almost shocking after so many days of howling wind. She got up and went to the window, looking out at a world transformed into a landscape of white. The snow had drifted as high as the cabin's roof in some places, and the sky was a blue so bright it hurt to look at. "Beautiful, is it not?" Russell said from behind her. She had not heard him approach, and she startled slightly. He was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "It is," she agreed. "I have never seen so much snow." "It will be a few more days before the roads are passable," he said, "but the worst is over." She should have felt relieved. She should have been happy that she would soon be able to continue her journey north. Instead, she felt her heart sink. "I suppose I should start making plans to leave," she said, trying to sound practical. "Is that what you want?" he asked quietly. She turned to face him and found him much closer than she had expected. She could see the flecks of gold in his gray-green eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow. "I do not know," she admitted. "I do not have much waiting for me in Flagstaff. I was only going there because my uncle wanted to, and now he is gone." "Then stay," Russell said, and there was something intense in his gaze that made her breath catch. "Stay here with me. Russell, I cannot ask you to take responsibility for me. You have already done so much." "I am not talking about responsibility," he said, reaching up to touch her cheek with careful fingers. "I am talking about something else entirely. These past 2 weeks, having you here, it has been the best 2 weeks I have had since I came to Arizona. Maybe the best 2 weeks I have ever had. I wake up looking forward to the day because you will be in it. I find myself thinking about what I can do to make you smile. And I know it is too soon, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I have to say it before you leave and I lose my chance." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Say what?" she whispered. "That I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "Maybe I have already fallen. I am not sure when it happened exactly, just that it did. And if you feel even a fraction of the same thing, then please stay. Stay and let me court you properly. Stay and let me show you what kind of life we could build together." She stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You barely know me," she said, but there was no conviction in her words. "I know enough," he said firmly. "I know you are brave and resourceful because you survived that storm. I know you are kind because of the way you have cared for me and my home these past weeks. I know you are smart and funny and beautiful, and I know that I do not want to go back to being alone now that I know what it is like to have you here." "Russell," she said, and her voice broke on his name. "I feel the same way. I have been trying so hard not to because I thought I was just grateful or confused or any number of things that were not love. But it is love, is it not? This feeling like my heart is too big for my chest. This wanting to be near you all the time. This sense that I have finally found a place where I belong." He smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly what it is." And then he was kissing her, his lips warm and firm against hers, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious and fragile. She kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside for the past 2 weeks, all the longing and hope and fear and joy. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "So you will stay?" he asked. "I will stay," she confirmed, "for as long as you will have me." "Forever then," he said, "because I am never letting you go." The winter gave way to spring, and with it came the hard work of running a ranch. Priscilla learned to help Russell with the cattle, though she drew the line at branding, which turned her stomach. She proved to have a natural way with horses, and Russell started letting her handle the training of the younger stock. She also discovered that she had a talent for keeping accounts, and she took over the ranch's books, organizing them in a way that made it much easier to see where they stood financially. In April, when the first wildflowers started to bloom across the Arizona high desert, Russell rode into Tucson and came back with a circuit preacher who married them in front of Russell's small herd of cattle and the wide blue sky. Priscilla wore a simple dress she had sewn from fabric Russell had bought on the same trip, and Russell wore his best shirt and a new string tie. They spoke their vows with the wind in their hair and their hands clasped tight, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Russell kissed her like she was his whole world. Their wedding night was spent in the cabin that had become her home, and Russell was gentle and patient, introducing her to the physical aspects of love with a tenderness that made her cry. "We have all the time in the world," he murmured against her hair as they lay tangled together afterwards. "There is no rush. We have the rest of our lives." As spring turned to summer, their life settled into a comfortable routine. Russell taught Priscilla to shoot, insisting that she needed to be able to defend herself if he was out on the range. She proved to be a decent shot, though not exceptional. She taught him some of the Mexican recipes she had learned growing up in San Antonio, and he developed a particular fondness for her enchiladas. They made the long trip into Tucson once a month for supplies, and Priscilla slowly began to make friends among the other ranch wives in the area. There were not many women out in their remote section of territory, but those who were there formed a tight-knit community, helping each other through difficult births and harsh winters and the loneliness that came with frontier life. In August, Priscilla realized she had not had her monthly courses in quite some time. She waited another few weeks to be sure, and then she told Russell over dinner one evening, simply and directly. "I am carrying your child," she said. "The baby should come in late winter, I think." Russell's fork clattered to his plate, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face, and he was up and around the table, pulling her into his arms. "Are you certain?" he asked. "As certain as I can be," she said. "Are you happy?" "Happy," he repeated. "Scylla, I am over the moon, a baby, our baby." He pulled back to look at her, his hands on her shoulders. "How are you feeling? Are you well? Do you need anything?" She laughed at his sudden concern. "I am fine. A little tired in the mornings, but otherwise healthy. We have months yet before the baby comes." "Still," he said seriously, "no more heavy lifting. And you should probably stop working with the horses. What if you fell? Russell, women have been having babies since the dawn of time while doing much more strenuous work than I do." "I am not made of glass." "No, but you are carrying something precious," he said, placing a hand on her still flat stomach, "and I will not take any chances with either of you." She covered his hand with hers. "We will be fine," she promised, "both of us." As her pregnancy progressed, Russell became increasingly protective, hovering over her until she had to shoo him away so she could get work done. But she found his concern endearing rather than annoying. It was clear that he was going to be a devoted father. In December, they made the trip into Tucson to stock up on supplies before winter set in again. While Russell was loading sacks of grain onto their wagon, Priscilla went into the general store to purchase fabric for baby clothes. She was studying a bolt of soft yellow cotton when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Well, little Priscilla Sanders, I heard you had died in that blizzard last winter." She turned to find Walter Morrison, one of the men from the wagon train that had left her behind. He was looking at her with an expression that made her skin crawl, his eyes traveling deliberately over her swollen belly. "As you can see, I survived," she said coolly. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have shopping to do." "Looks like you have been busy," he said with a leer. "Found yourself a man pretty quick after your uncle died, did you not?" "That is none of your concern," she said, turning back to the fabric. "I am just saying, it is mighty convenient. Old man dies, and suddenly you are all set up with a ranch and a husband. Some might call that suspicious timing." Priscilla felt anger rise in her chest. "Some might call it surviving. Some might also point out that it was your wagon train that left a sick old man and his niece behind with no protection or support. So perhaps you should examine your own conscience before casting aspersions on mine." Walter's face flushed an ugly red. "You always did have too much mouth on you. Your man should teach you some respect. Is there a problem here?" Russell's voice came from the doorway, hard and cold in a way Priscilla had never heard it before. He stepped into the store, his eyes locked on Walter with an intensity that made the other man take a step back. "No problem," Walter said quickly. "Just saying hello to an old acquaintance." "It looked like more than that to me," Russell said, moving to stand beside Priscilla. "It looked like you were bothering my wife, and I take a very dim view of men who bother my wife." "I meant no offense," Walter said, backing toward the door. "I was just leaving anyway." "Good idea," Russell said flatly. He watched until Walter had left the store, and then he turned to Priscilla with concern in his eyes. "Are you all right? What did he say to you?" "Nothing worth repeating," she said, though she was shaking slightly. "He was just being crude and unpleasant. I handled it." "I know you can handle yourself," Russell said gently. "But you do not have to anymore. We handle things together now." She leaned into him, grateful for his solid presence. "Together," she agreed. They finished their shopping and headed home, and Priscilla was relieved to leave Tucson behind. As they drove through the winter landscape, she found herself thinking about how much her life had changed in just 1 year. This time last January, she had been alone and frightened, facing an uncertain future. Now she was heading home to a warm cabin with a husband she loved and a baby on the way. It seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking about?" Russell asked, glancing over at her. "Just how lucky I am," she said. "How lucky we both are." "Luck had nothing to do with it," he said. "You fought your way through a blizzard to my door. That was courage, not luck. Everything good that has happened since then, we made happen together." "Still," she said, taking his hand, "I like to think that fate had a hand in bringing us together. What were the chances that I would stumble onto your property in the middle of that storm? What were the chances that you would be the kind of man who would take in a stranger and treat her with such kindness?" "Maybe it was fate," he conceded. "Or maybe the universe just knew that we needed each other." The baby came in late February during another snowstorm, though not nearly as fierce as the one that had brought Priscilla to Russell's door. The nearest midwife was a woman named Mrs. Chen, who lived about 8 miles to the east, and Russell rode through the snow to fetch her when Priscilla's pain started. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, but when it was finally over, Priscilla held a squalling red-faced baby boy in her arms. "He is perfect," Russell said, his voice choked with emotion as he looked down at his son. "Absolutely perfect. He has your eyes," Priscilla said, exhausted but happy. "Or he will once they change from that newborn blue." They named him Robert Quinn, after Russell's father, who had died when Russell was young. Little Robert proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who kept them up at all hours with his demands for food and attention. But neither Russell nor Priscilla minded. They were besotted with their son, marveling over every tiny finger and toe, every yawn and stretch. As Robert grew from an infant into a toddler, Priscilla and Russell's ranch prospered. They added to their herd gradually, never expanding faster than they could manage, and built a small bunkhouse for the seasonal hands they hired. Priscilla started a garden that provided vegetables through the growing season, and she learned to preserve, and so they would have supplies through the winter. When Robert was 3, a daughter arrived, Catherine, who had Priscilla's dark hair and Russell's stubborn determination. 2 years after that came another boy, Thomas, who was quieter than his siblings but blessed with a quick mind and a gentle disposition. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that killed grass and made it hard to keep the cattle fed. There were rustlers who stole stock and had to be dealt with by the territorial authorities. There was a bad winter when Robert was 6 that killed a quarter of their herd and nearly bankrupted them. But through it all, Priscilla and Russell faced each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. They never forgot the blizzard that had brought them together. Every January, on the anniversary of the day Priscilla had stumbled to Russell's door, they would stand together and look out at the Arizona landscape and remember how lucky they were to have found each other. "You ever regret it?" Russell asked one such anniversary, about 15 years after they had met. They were standing on the porch of the house they had built to replace the small cabin, watching the sun set over land that now supported a herd of nearly 1,000 head. Their children were inside doing their evening chores, their voices drifting out through the open windows. "Regret what?" Priscilla asked, though she knew what he meant. "Staying here with me instead of continuing on to Flagstaff. You could have had a different life, maybe an easier one." She turned to him and took his face in her hands. "Russell Quinn, I have never regretted a single day I have spent with you. This life we have built together, this family we have made, this is everything I could have ever wanted and more than I ever dreamed was possible. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a thing." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, the way he still did even after 15 years of marriage. "I love you," he said when they broke apart. "I loved you from almost the first moment. I saw you frozen on my doorstep, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," she replied. "My cowboy who promised to keep me warm and safe. You have kept that promise every single day." The years continued to pass, bringing with them both joy and sorrow. They lost Priscilla's mare to old age and Russell's favorite horse to a rattlesnake bite. They gained grandchildren when Robert married a girl from Tucson and started a family of his own. Catherine grew into a strong-willed young woman who scandalized the neighbors by insisting on learning to rope and brand alongside her brothers. Thomas showed an aptitude for numbers and took over managing the ranch's finances, allowing Priscilla to focus on other things. Through it all, the love between Russell and Priscilla remained constant, a steady flame that warmed them through the cold winters and gave them strength during the hard times. They grew old together, their hair turning gray and then white, their faces lining with the evidence of decades spent under the Arizona sun. On a warm spring evening in 1897, 24 years after the blizzard that had changed both their lives, Russell and Priscilla sat together on their porch watching yet another spectacular sunset. They were alone, their children grown and gone to homes of their own, though none had moved far. Robert's ranch bordered theirs to the north, and Catherine had married a rancher whose land adjoined theirs to the south. Thomas lived in Tucson, where he ran a successful mercantile business but visited every Sunday for dinner. "We did all right, did we not?" Russell said, his hand finding Priscilla's and lacing their fingers together. "We did better than all right," Priscilla said. "We built something beautiful here. Something that will last long after we are gone. No regrets, not a single one," she said firmly. "You. Only that I did not find you sooner," he said. "But I suppose we found each other at exactly the right time. Any earlier and we might not have been ready for each other." That is a very philosophical way of looking at it. "I have been reading a lot of philosophy lately," he said with a smile. "It passes the time." She laughed, the sound as warm and genuine as it had been when she was 22 and hearing him joke about talking philosophy with his cattle. "You are still reading to pass the long winter nights." "Always," he said. "Though they are not lonely anymore. They have not been lonely since that January night when the most stubborn, brave, beautiful woman I ever met showed up at my door half frozen and completely determined to survive." "I was terrified," she admitted. "I thought I was going to die out there in that storm." "But you did not die," he said. "You lived. And in living, you gave me a reason to live too. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made everything mean something again." She squeezed his hand. "We saved each other," she said. "That storm brought me to your door, but we made the choice to build a life together. That was us, not fate or luck or anything else. That was two people deciding they were better together than apart." "Best decision I ever made," Russell said. "Mine too," Priscilla agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the first stars began to appear. Inside the house, a clock chimed the hour, but neither of them moved to go inside. They were content to sit together, hands clasped, watching the night unfold over the land they had spent their lives building into a home. "Do you remember what I said to you that first night?" Russell asked. "When I opened the door and found you in the snow." "You said a lot of things that night," Priscilla replied. "Which particular words are you thinking of?" "When I was working on your feet and you were in so much pain. I told you I knew it hurt, but that we needed to get your blood flowing again. And then I asked your name. I remember, she said softly. You introduced yourself as Russell Quinn, and you said most folks called you Russ. Then you told me about running cattle on the land around here. And do you remember what I promised you? She thought back through the years to that desperate night, to the warmth of his cabin and the kindness in his eyes. You promised to keep me warm and safe, she said. When you told me I could stay until the storm passed, you said you would not send a woman back out into a blizzard. You asked what kind of man I thought you were, and you said a good one, Russell recalled. I have tried to live up to that assessment every day since. You have exceeded it, Priscilla said firmly. You have been not just a good man, but the best man. The best husband, the best father, the best partner anyone could ask for. You kept your promise, Russell. You kept me warm and safe, not just that night, but every night for 24 years. It was never a hardship, he said. Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. And loving you has made me the luckiest woman in the world. They finally went inside as the evening grew cold, but not before Russell pulled Priscilla close and kissed her under the stars, the same stars that had watched over them through all their years together. It was a kiss full of history and promise, of shared memories and continued devotion, of a love that had been forged in the crucible of a winter storm and had only grown stronger with time. Inside, they moved through the familiar routines of evening, Russell banking the fire while Priscilla made tea, both of them moving in the comfortable synchronization of people who had spent decades in each other's company. They sat together by the fireplace, sipping their tea and talking about their children and grandchildren, making plans for the spring branding, and discussing whether they should plant more acres in hay this year. It was an ordinary evening, unremarkable in almost every way, and yet it was also perfect. Because after 24 years of marriage, Russell and Priscilla had learned that the extraordinary moments were built on a foundation of ordinary ones, that a life well lived was made up of thousands of small choices to show up for each other day after day. When they finally climbed into bed that night, Russell pulled Priscilla close, her back to his chest, his arm draped over her waist. It was how they had slept for years, finding comfort in the closeness. "Good night, my love," he murmured into her hair. "Good night," she replied, lacing her fingers through his. "See you in the morning." "Always," he promised. And as they drifted off to sleep, safe and warm in the home they had built together, the wind picked up outside, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of spring. It was nothing like the blizzard that had brought them together all those years ago, but it reminded them both of how far they had come and how much they had to be grateful for. The years that followed continued to be good to them. Their cattle operation became one of the most successful in the territory. And when Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, the Quinn Ranch was recognized as one of the pioneering enterprises that had helped settle the region. Russell and Priscilla were in their 60s by then, still active in the ranch's operations, though they had turned over most of the day-to-day management to their children. They had 7 grandchildren by that time, with an 8th on the way, and the ranch had grown to encompass nearly 5,000 acres. What had started as one man's desire for land and peace and quiet had become a family legacy, something that would be passed down through generations. But for all their success and prosperity, Russell and Priscilla never forgot where it had all started. They never forgot the desperation of that January night in 1873, or the simple kindness that had led Russell to open his door to a half-frozen stranger. They told the story often to their children and grandchildren, wanting them to understand that the foundation of their family's fortune was not luck or ruthlessness, or even particularly hard work, though there had been plenty of that. It was compassion. It was the choice to help someone in need, even when it would have been easier to turn away. "Your grandfather could have left me to die," Priscilla would tell the wide-eyed children gathered around her rocking chair. "He did not know me. He had no obligation to me. But he chose kindness anyway, and that choice changed both our lives forever." "It was not that noble," Russell would interject with a smile. "I would have had to be a monster to leave her out in that storm." "Perhaps," Priscilla would concede. "But there are monsters in this world, and you were not one of them. You were a good man who made the right choice, and I will be grateful for that until my dying day." That day came later than either of them expected. Priscilla lived to the remarkable age of 83, passing peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1934. Russell was 87 when he followed her 2 years later, dying in the same bed where she had died, in the same room where they had spent so many nights wrapped in each other's arms. Their children buried them side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with headstones that bore not just their names and dates, but the words that had defined their lives together. On Russell's stone, the inscription read, "He kept his promise." On Priscilla's, "She found her home." And between the two stones, placed there by their children, was a smaller marker with words that told their story simply and completely. "Love forged in a winter storm, lasting beyond forever." The ranch continued under the management of their descendants, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation that Russell and Priscilla had built. The original cabin where it had all started was preserved and maintained, becoming a sort of shrine to the family's origins. On the anniversary of that fateful blizzard every year, the entire extended Quinn family would gather at the cabin for a celebration, raising glasses of cider and telling stories about the cowboy and the woman he had saved, and how that act of simple kindness had created a legacy that would endure for generations. Because that was the truth at the heart of Russell and Priscilla's story. It was not just a tale of romantic love, though there was certainly that in abundance. It was a story about what happens when one person chooses to see another person's humanity, when compassion overrides self-interest, when a door is opened instead of closed. It was about how the smallest acts of kindness can ripple outward in ways we cannot possibly imagine, changing not just 2 lives but dozens, then hundreds, as those lives touch others and those others touch still more. Russell Quinn had opened his door to a stranger on a winter night in 1873, and in doing so, he had set in motion a chain of events that would echo down through the decades. Children were born who would never have existed otherwise. Land was cultivated that might have remained wild. A family was created where there had been only loneliness, and at the center of it all was love. The kind of love that poets write about and storytellers weave into legends. The kind that starts with a spark and grows into a steady flame, warming everyone who comes near it. The kind that endures beyond death, living on in the memories of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry the legacy forward. Priscilla Sanders had been right when she told Russell that fate had brought them together. But Russell had been equally right when he said they had made the choice to build a life together. Both things were true. Fate had delivered Priscilla to Russell's door, but what happened after was entirely their doing. They had chosen each other every single day for more than half a century, through good times and bad, through prosperity and hardship, through joy and sorrow. And that choice, repeated over and over again across all those years, had created something remarkable. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create meaning where there had been none before. Russell had promised to keep Priscilla warm and safe, and he had kept that promise until his last breath. Priscilla had chosen to stay with Russell, to build a life with him, and she had never wavered in that choice. Together, they had created something that would outlast them both, something that would continue to ripple outward long after they were gone. They had started with nothing but a cabin in the wilderness and a fierce determination to survive, and they had built an empire, not through cruelty or exploitation, but through hard work and partnership and love. That was the legacy of the blizzard of 1873. That was the story of Russell Quinn and Priscilla Sanders, the cowboy and the woman he saved, who saved him right back. It was a love story for the ages, set against the harsh beauty of the Arizona high desert, and it would be told and retold as long as there were Quinns to tell it. The ranch itself continued to thrive well into the modern era, adapting to changing times while holding on to the values that Russell and Priscilla had instilled. The land that Russell had claimed with a homestead filing and built through years of backbreaking work became one of the largest privately held ranches in Arizona, but it was never sold or divided. The Quinn family held it together through determination and love, honoring the memory of the couple who had started it all. And every winter, when the first snow fell on the Arizona high country, someone in the Quinn family would look out at the white landscape and remember the story. They would think about a terrified young woman fighting her way through a blizzard, about a lonely cowboy opening his door, about a promise made and kept. They would remember that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that kindness matters, and that the choices we make in moments of crisis can echo down through generations. That was the true magic of Russell and Priscilla's story. It was not just their story anymore. It had become a part of the family's identity, a reminder of who they were and where they had come from. It was a North Star, guiding them through their own storms and reminding them that the most important things in life were not wealth or success, but love and family and the bonds we forge with one another. So the story lived on, passed from parent to child, from grandparent to grandchild, growing and evolving with each telling but never losing its essential truth. A blizzard had stranded a scared woman at a cowboy's door. He had promised to keep her warm and safe. And from that simple beginning had come everything else, a love story that had truly lasted beyond forever.